boost for May on free movement, Merkel hints at new migration limit as Boris savages EU's open borders. Angela Merkel has conceded the European Union could overhaul its rules on migration, but only to try to keep Britain in the single market. In a major shift, the German Chancellor suggested there was room for debate on the issue of free movement in Brexit talks with the UK. Since the referendum vote, EU leaders have steadfastly warned they will not give ground to Britain on migration rules, insisting we must accept free movement of people if we want to remain in the single market, which allows trading without tariffs. But last night Mrs Merkel, the EU's most influential figure, suggested migration rules for the bloc as a whole could be tightened so Britain is not excluded from maintaining its trading ties. It came as Boris Johnson said it was to claim free movement was a sacred tenet of the EU. Mrs Merkel's remarks will be an encouragement to Theresa May as they show she is looking at ways to accommodate the Prime Minister's demands. Mrs May has said Britain does not face a binary choice between curbing immigration and getting a good trade agreement. But doubts will remain over whether the EU could deliver anything beyond minor tweaks to rules, making no real difference to the numbers of migrants coming in. Mrs Merkel's comments also came as Brussels revealed a plan to give extra handouts to migrants to encourage them to move, which is likely to lead to a pre-Brexit surge of jobless migrants coming to Britain. Speaking at a meeting of Germany's Confederation of Employers Associations, Mrs Merkel said the EU should look at how it can change its rules as a whole. Were we to make an exception for the free movement of people with Britain, this would mean we would endanger principles of the whole internal market in the European Union, because everyone else will then want these exceptions, she said. I personally am of the view that we will have to discuss further with the European Commission when this freedom of movement applies from. She said if, for example, someone came to Germany from Eastern Europe and worked only for a short time but acquired a lifelong claim on benefits, then I see a question about which we must talk again. On the issue of freedom of movement, Foreign Secretary Mr. Johnson said in an interview with Czech newspaper Hospodářsk, everybody now has it in their head that every human being has some fundamental God-given right to move wherever they want. It's not true. That was never the case. That was never a founding principle of the EU. Total myth. Mr. Johnson said Britain would like to keep access to the single market while clamping down on migration. He also speculated Britain would have to leave the EU's customs union, in which members agree to impose common tariffs on countries outside the group, so it could strike its own trade deals. But Guy Verhofstadt, the European Parliament's chief Brexit negotiator, wrote on Twitter, "Can't wait to negotiate with Boris Johnson, so that I can read him Article 3 of the Treaty of Rome." He cited a section of the EU's founding declaration describing the abolition, as between member states, of obstacles to freedom of movement for persons. Last night in her speech, Mrs. Merkel said she was offering fair negotiations, but added, first, however, Britain must explain in what manner it would like this exit. While leaving the door open to tweaking rules on movement, she insisted the broader principle was not up for negotiation, saying, "We cannot wobble on the basic principle of free movement of people." Mrs. Merkel is under pressure from German industry leaders, such as car manufacturers, to do what she can to keep trade links with Britain so they do not lose valuable business. However, parallels will be drawn between her latest intervention and offers made to David Cameron during his renegotiation of Britain's membership of the EU.